What is up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, Jonald, and yow! It is Wednesday, and you know what that means? It's time for a one-off! Did you guys see that? That was kind of weird. We're just gonna, anyway, back at it again with, not Course. Course comes up in this one. We're back at it again with a new planet. I mean, I say new, I've thought about it. I actually just named this one. This is, fun fact, canonically in the planets I've made, probably the third. Lotrim being the second, and, Jay, I can't remember what I called them. There's so many names right now, and I'm trying to remember. Anyway, that one being the first. So this is the third planet I've made, but this is the first time I'm actually writing about it. So I'm very excited. This is the first time I get to dive into the magic system. And yes, if you have not listened to One Off Wednesday number 9, I will have it linked. I'll do like a little card thing, and I'll have it at the end. Please go watch that before you watch this one. You get an introduction to the main character. Very important. Once again, read by my brother Daniel. He's going to do a fantastic job. Very excited. Into the one-off.
Travel Journal, Enjarah. Written by Jonathan Howe. Read for you by Daniel Howe. Traveler hid behind some bushes, watching the standoff. Ahead on the road, two men faced each other, brandishing the weapons which characterized this planet's magic system. Traveler had his own weapon ready to go, but it was much less conspicuous than the large swords these men brandished. I yearn for the day civilization reaches this planet, he thought. Comparatively, Enjarah was behind by at least a century. Traveler attributed this lag to their heavy dependence on bloodsmiths and how tradition limited exploration. Thoughts for another moment, he recognized, giving the men on the road his full attention. The one to the left stood with his sword casually to his side, leaving his chest wide open. He clearly felt in control. The man on the right held his sword in a white-knuckle grip. Both held longswords, meaning they were on the same playing field, ability-wise as well. "I'm gonna need to ask you to sever any blood weapons and come with me," the nervous man stated.
"Are you asking a question?"
the other man asked.
"If you want to hold any authority in this town, officer, you'll need to speak as if you mean it."
"Sever your weapons," the first man said, steel in his voice.
"Now that's more like it."
The second man leapt forward, sword back for a big swing.
"Ice blade strike!"
he yelled, swinging his flame-wreathed sword at the officer. Traveler saw the moment of confusion in the officer's eye, mirroring his own momentary shock. The officer leapt back, and an explosion flame blew up in the space he'd occupied a moment ago. That's a tactic, the traveler thought. The officer took a defensive stance. The opponent, clearly some outlaw, grinned maniacally. He took a step forward, preparing to swing with his backhanded stroke.
"Backhand swing!"
he yelled, stepping in close and bringing the pommel of his sword into the officer's gut. The officer lurched forward, coughing and dropping his longsword. The weapon never hit the ground, phasing into nothingness. In his hand, a small metal dart appeared. The officer flew back 30 feet as if pulled by an unseen force. These people need springs, Traveler thought. Just better bloodsmith technology in general. In the 2 months he'd spent not making a map, he'd instead been tinkering and experimenting with the robust and widely unexplored magic system of Enjarah. Using modern technological advancements, he'd made blood tools these men couldn't dream of.
"Running, officer?"
the outlaw called. His longsword vanished, replaced by a boomerang. He jumped, beginning to follow a curving path in the sky. The officer turned slowly, keeping the outlaw in sight.
"Sky strike!"
the outlaw called, launching downward. His boomerang was replaced with the rapier, the tip of which stretched out toward the officer. The officer dodged, but fell into the outlaw's trap. The outlaw teleported to the ground where the tip of the rapier touched. He changed weapons, back to the longsword, and swung, landing a cut on the fleeing officer.
"Sir, you're not that experienced, are you?"
the outlaw mocked. "And," the officer challenged, "it's my job to get better."
"Won't do you much good if you're already dead,"
the outlaw said, jumping forward, longsword in hand.
"Flame slash!"
This time, the officer was ready, switching to a small shield. The outlaw's sword crashed into the shield, flames wrapping around the shield and burning his arm. The officer's eyes went wide in pain and shock.
Why would you trust anything I say?
The outlaw sneered. The officer staggered back, dart forming in his other hand. He leapt forward, trying to shield charge his opponent. The man stepped to the side easily, landing a quick slash on the officer. The battle continued in this manner for a few minutes. Traveler could tell the officer was catching on to the man's tricks, but he couldn't respond properly. He didn't read the movements, in exclusion to the man's words. Despite clearly losing, the officer kept getting up and standing his ground. Something wasn't adding up to Traveler or the outlaw, who stopped his relentless attacks.
You've got a trick up your sleeve,
the outlaw said. The officer used his longsword to brace himself up.
I wouldn't be a good officer otherwise,
he said. The outlaw laughed. First a singular barking laugh, but it devolved into a full-bellied chuckle.
Oh, I haven't had this much fun in years. It almost makes me want to spare you.
The officer smiled a pained grin.
Too bad I don't feel the same.
He launched forward again. The outlaw raised his sword.
Charged strong.
He was cut off by a loud crack. A gash appeared on his cheek, and the officer stood, whip in one hand, dart in the other. The whip was clearly a well-made piece solely of metal. The outlaw made as if to scream, but no sound escaped his lips.
I got tired of your voice,
the officer explained. He brandished the whip. The outlaw's eyes narrowed in rage. He made a straight line with his mouth and dismissed his sword, summoning the boomerang instead. The officer dismissed his whip and summoned his shield again. The outlaw leapt forward, curving in the air silently. The officer turned to follow, keeping his front to the outlaw. In one swift motion, the outlaw dismissed his boomerang, dropped to the ground, and slid between the officer's legs. Traveler saw what the officer did not, as the outlaw had summoned his rapier at the last moment, planting the tip in the ground where he'd just been. As the officer turned, the outlaw teleported behind him. He swapped the rapier for a trident, laying a hand on the officer's back. The officer screamed as his shirt was dissolved. Underneath, touching his chest, was a necklace made of pure metal. The outlaw mouthed something, but no sound came out. He grabbed the necklace as the officer spun, trying to clobber the outlaw with his shield.
No!
The officer yelled as the necklace was yanked off his person. It dissolved into nothingness, clearly dismissed. Before he could summon it again, the outlaw summoned his longsword and ran the officer through.
Damn,
Traveler said. I was really hoping I wouldn't need to step in. He summoned his ball bearing and zipped into the battle. He swatted away the outlaw's grip on his sword. The loss of contact made the weapon dissolve, allowing Traveler to pull the officer off to one side. He laid the man down gently, relieved to see the necklace back on. It won't save you, but it will buy time, Traveler thought. He stood to face the outlaw.
What on Enjarah?
The man said, his voice returned. I've been watching for a while, Traveler explained. You fight like someone who wants to survive, yet you act like someone who wants to kill.
Aren't they the same thing?
The man asked. Not in my opinion, Traveler said casually. You see, he zipped behind the outlaw in the blink of an eye. Someone who wants to survive only kills when necessary. He swung a fist into the man's kidneys. But you played with your opponent even though you clearly outmatched him. The outlaw growled, flying back, boomerang in hand. While his back was turned, Traveler dismissed his ball bearing, summoning his bullet instead. A dozen clones of himself appeared. When the outlaw stopped flying and turned back around, he yelped.
What? I mean, who are you?
He stammered. What am I? One of Traveler's clones replied. I'm just a simple man, another said, trying to make maps of all the places I go. All 13 travelers ran towards the outlaw, summoning a chef's knife in their dominant hand. The outlaw swung a newly summoned longsword, a wave of fire taking out all the clones. Traveler let the flame lick him, leaving burns across his face and arms. He dismissed the bullet and summoned a fork. The outlaw staggered as Traveler charged through the flames, plunging the knife into the man's gut. Traveler held eye contact with the man, letting his body heal up. The outlaw watched with fear in his eyes.
I don't understand,
He cried, horror overtaking his face. You don't have to, Traveler said. He pulled the knife out of the man's stomach and pushed him back. I precisely stabbed between any major blood vessels and organs. If you run now, you can survive. Traveler dismissed his fork, healing complete. He brandished the knife. I won't have the same mercy a second time. The outlaw turned and ran. Traveler watched him run, making sure he didn't try anything suspicious. When the man was finally gone, Traveler summoned his ball bearing. He zipped to his pack in the bushes, grabbed a fork from the pack, and zipped to the wounded officer. The man was still breathing, but they were weak, shallow breaths. Do you have bonding potential left? Traveler asked the man. The officer shook his head weakly. Sever a bond with the mid-level tool. The man looked pained and confused, but he did as asked. Appearing from nowhere, the metal whip dropped to the ground. Traveler dipped the fork in the man's blood and placed it in the officer's hand. Bond this. It won't work, the man complained, coughing up blood. It's made with changeling blood extract. It'll work. The officer gave him a confused look, but clenched his fist around the fork. It disappeared for a moment before the man resummoned it. Immediately, his wounds started healing. After a minute, the man was recovered enough to sit up. Don't finish healing, Traveler told him. In fact, I'd like you to sever connection to my fork for now. The officer did as directed, picking up his fallen whip and rebounding the weapon. What is that? The officer asked. The results of technology and bloodsmithing, Traveler said. I've never heard of a weapon that can be bonded by the one who didn't make it. It requires a rare blood you will never come across here, Traveler explained. It is only found in a far-off place known as Garrison. He pocketed the fork, standing up to survey their surroundings. I think the outlaw is gone, but you should head back to your town. Is there any way I can thank you? The officer asked. Traveler met the man's eyes. He studied them, looking for the man's heart. Answer me this. Why didn't you run? You knew he was far better than you from the moment you started the battle. The officer looked down, ashamed. I know. I just couldn't help thinking that if I let him go, he'd kill other people. I had to try. He looked back up into Traveler's eyes. Behind them was a strength Traveler had seen before. In those heroic types like Miles and, Traveler thought, trailing off as he remembered a young man from long, long ago. Well, if you're going to put yourself in more danger, you might as well have the tools to succeed. Traveler severed his connection with a gem-edged dagger, catching the weapon in midair as it fell. He held out the weapon towards the man. What is your name? Huron, the officer said, studying the dagger intensely. Well, Huron, this is my Korstian render. It has a unique property you also won't find anywhere near here. He passed the weapon over to Huron, who took it gingerly. You're right to hold that weapon with caution. I've specially designed it to be devastating on Enjarah. You talk like you're not from here, Huron said, looking at the traveler quizzically. And not just from another continent, but a different planet. Traveler smiled slyly, tapping the side of his nose. Which way is your town? Traveler asked. Huron pointed in the direction the outlaw went. Traveler sighed. I'll go with you for a bit, explained the weapon. Despite his statement, Traveler stopped talking. Huron tried to get information out of him, but Traveler kept quiet for the first few minutes of the walk. Eventually, when Traveler saw what he was looking for, he pulled off to the side of the road. The Korstian render is unique in its ability. If you ready yourself... Traveler turned towards the bush he'd seen a rapier in. Just then, the outlaw teleported into the space. Traveler stepped into his bubble, reaching under his arms and pulling back, pressing his hands behind the man's head. I told you there wouldn't be mercy, Traveler whispered in his ear. The man tried to squirm, but Traveler held firm. Officer Huron, if you would reach out and touch him. Huron summoned the Korstian render and touched the outlaw. A shiver ran through the man as all his bonded weapons appeared in the air and dropped to the ground. What? No! The man screamed. Traveler summoned a blade, a simple dagger, and stabbed through the back of the man's neck. Huron staggered back in horror. Traveler dismissed the dagger and dropped the man's corpse. As you can see, the render can forcefully sever bonds. Hirend looked down in awe. How did you do this? He asked. A forging technique and Motian crystals. Technically, you can use Sugasi from your world, but it works best with crystals from Korst. So in other words, this blade is unique. Until people start doing what I do, yes, Traveler said. And since it is so unique, I'm going to need you to stay alive. I'll need you to memorize this shape. Traveler summoned his fork. You aren't going to give me the other? Hiran asked. No, Traveler shook his head. It's time technology gets out to the world. So then why not you come show a smith how to make it? Hiran asked. 2 reasons. Firstly, I need to stay mostly in the background of history. Secondly, because I wasted so much time exploring your planet's magic that I'm behind on my map. Lotrim really needs a new map soon, and I promised Rowan I'd be there to help out the finishing touches to Orate's design. Hiren gave the traveler a slack-jawed look. He pulled a pad of paper out of his pocket and sketched out the design of the fork. Like this? Yes. Hiren pocketed the design, then stooped to pick up all the fallen weapons. Anyway, Traveler continued, try not to die. I'll be back hopefully in half a century to get that render back. 50 years? Hiren balked. The Traveler nodded. The blink of an eye. You must have lived such a life, Hiren commented. I'd love to hear the story. Maybe if I get back in 50 years, I'll let you know. Until then, try not to die. Before Hiren could respond, Traveler summoned a metal propeller and took off in flight.
And we're back. Anyway, yeah, so, I really hope you enjoyed that. I thoroughly enjoyed writing that one. It just happened. It's a great, I don't know, I just love writing from this character, but also this planet. I like the magic system, the idea of being able to forge kind of the things you make and then having a whole potential and limit. I'm not going to get into that because eventually this would be, timeline-wise, if I get to write books, I want to say the 5th or 6th book I've written would be on this planet. That's kind of that's a whole big timeline thing that I have planned out. So I won't get into that, but I will get into a fun fact. So as I've kind of stated before, my entire goal is to hopefully become an author. And right now, while I do this for fun, it also is a hopeful step that I can, do this and use it as evidence towards, hey, I should be an author to agents and stuff. So if you enjoyed this, please share it with your friends, anyone who you think might like narrative writing and creative writing, not fan fiction, just fiction, fantasy, that type of stuff, because it really does end up meaning a lot if I can get more viewers and get more and then really have support and evidence to go, hey, look, I'm writing and people enjoy it. So there's something here that you should represent for me as an author. But until then, I hope you keep enjoying. I hope you keep coming back to watch. And I will see you guys next week. Neat. Okay, bye.